Hey, hi Rajiv. Thanks so much for joining me today. I wanted to quickly have a conversation with you. It feels like this week all eyes are on remote work. And as Tandem is thinking through building virtual workspaces for remote teams, I'd love to have a conversation on that. I also think it's a perfect time to have a conversation on life after YC and to really get your thoughts on how you manage such a successful and competitive fundraise the last batch, and some considerations for early stage companies that are currently going through YC, and how your role as a CEO has evolved since you went through that process, and now you're seeing a lot of insane and unexpected growth over the past couple of weeks, so really helping founders get prepared for what's to come after demo day.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, I would love to spend a little bit of time on how you really think about the category, which is virtual offices, and both how that ties into the broader remote work stack, and even some thoughts on how the space has evolved over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there was a shift happening in how we work even before the recent wave. And the shift, one way to understand that is to think about, where do most virtual calls or most digital calls happen? And before the shift to more remote and distributed work, most digital calls happened company to company, like external calls. And so the model that really makes sense, because you need to set up a call with somebody who's not in your org, you don't have a lot of trust necessarily, it needs to be very self-contained, is a better conference call. So the conference call model is sort of what evolved into Zoom. Now with salespeople, with distributed offices, with multiple campuses, with globally distributed companies, every company is to some degree remote. And many teams are to some degree remote, even if they aren't working from home. And so just because of the combinatorics and the math of it, most digital conversations are starting to be internal. And when you have most conversations being internal, you have higher trust, you need much better sense of presence, much more fluidity, flexibility. And the model that we see emerging, and it's not just us, there are other companies working on this, there are many other companies working on this too, is that of instant communication, or like a tap on the shoulder. What's the digital equivalent of that? And we think that the term virtual office captures that really well, and we're going to see a lot more of those as we go.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's also been interesting to see, I mean, now over the past few days, as many offices are seeing a forced shutdown, I'm curious to hear exactly, how you came up with, the technology side of the business. I've been watching Twitter over the past few days, and it feels like there are a lot of individuals that are now working from home, some for the first time, and so they're coming up with ideas around things like virtual water coolers. And I think right now is a moment in time where people are starting to see that, remote work has the potential to have a really large and thriving ecosystem. And I think there will be kind of a broader suite of tools and features. And there's more to this remote work stack. But there are a lot of technical complexities. And so I'd love to get a sense for how you thought about the core technology for Tandem, maybe even some of the challenges and some of the more nuanced issues that you've experienced along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for context, in case people who are watching this aren't familiar with Tandem, Tandem's a virtual office for remote teams, and the form it takes is a desktop app where you see who's online in your team and you see what they're working on. So you see the work app that they're in, and you can talk and screen share in one click. A good analogy is Discord, where you can see what games your friends are playing, except instead of games, we show work-related apps. Word, Google Docs, Figma, Notion, these work-related apps. And I think that the best way to understand, well, it's been very interesting to see people, much more people and many more teams and organizations making a fast transition to remote work and looking for, it's been interesting to see what they look for. And I think your first instinct when you transition to remote work is to look for the same thing you had in the office. So You look for lunchtime conversations, you look for whiteboarding sessions, you look for uh, being able to just have quick conversations and spontaneous conversations about things that occur to you or ideas. And I think what people are realizing is that it's very difficult to find a direct transcription of those actions into digital work. The way we've approached it and the way we've built our technology stack is a translation, not a transcription. And so what I mean by that is we think about the function. We thought from first principles and from experimentation about the function of each of these things in a physical office, and how do we get that same function remote? So for when it comes to lunchtime conversations, it's kind of awkward to eat lunch in front of your laptop, and it's also really hard to coordinate cooking or eating schedules. So instead, what we created is more general purpose rooms where you can call them like a coffee chat. And we really tried to make the room model, or the where you can be on voice, be on video, even be screen sharing, really, really flexible. And then for things like brainstorming, where normally you'd be in front of a whiteboard, instead what we did is we integrated with a bunch of tools that are collaborative, like Notion, like Figma, where people can have these conversations and brainstorms and talk at the same time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's really interesting to hear too. I mean, just given the breadth of use cases, it's awesome to hear just how you're approaching all of these concepts team by team and individual by individual. Have you found that as you're kind of unbundling the workplace and doing customer development across different teams, has this impacted the way you think about Tandem's culture and sort of how you build empathy for, your internal teammates? Because I think one of the interesting things, and one thing that I especially love about your culture, is that you do take a strong stance on the type of people that you hire, the empathy that you want to have for individuals that work at Tandem, and even your approach to hiring. Can you speak to a little bit about, customer development and how you're unpacking the workplace, and any insights that have helped you land on, Tandem's culture today?
Yeah, I mean, they're very related. I think that one of the reasons our product stands out amongst others because we are communication first, and we're around synchronous collaboration first. We really value actually talking, even though many remote teams have shifted in some ways to being more asynchronous. And I think that comes from our team culture. We formed the team actually for a previous product, and we pivoted a few times before working on this problem of remote work. And it was really team first. I wanted to work with Tim. I wanted to work with Bernat. They were the best designer and engineer I'd ever worked with. And so the reason we started the company was collaboration first, almost idea second. Long story, several pivots. We arrived on this problem of remote work. We experienced it ourselves as we were working from home. And that collaboration first ethos is sort of carried through to how we build the product, how open and transparent it is, how much it allows people to talk online. And then also when we think about the team, there's a very natural fit with our category. So, we're bottoms up SaaS. It's a little bit more, it has a lot of similarities to consumer in that the product grows almost virally. It allows us to have a smaller team and give people a lot of scope and be extremely collaborative. So most people will work up and down each feature or will own entire features themselves. And so we definitely select for people who are amazing builders, amazing engineers, but also have good product sense and a lot of empathy for users.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to double click a little bit on the types of people that you're hiring as well, because I think one thing that's interesting is that some of the candidates have been pretty senior, and I would say that they've been more senior than what the average seed company would be able to recruit, incentivize, and ultimately close. So how do you think about exec recruiting at such an early stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a unique situation where we have two we have two components to the business. One is the user-facing product and how that looks and feels and what's the experience there. And to really nail that and stay ahead and create a new experience, you need fast iteration. And that's where, long or deep experience is sort of mixed. Like we can have a variety of people on that team. But the other half of our business, which is super core, is the audio video stack and making a great audio video experience that's reliable, that's always there, that's quick and performant. And doing audio video communications, even now, is hard. Like the internet is bad. It's a complex problem that goes through many layers of networking. And so that's where we've really reached out to some of the people who have built, the big technologies of the previous generation. So team members with experience at, say, FaceTime and Discord. And that's where I think really experienced candidates are a huge asset. I think it is very interesting doing something that's similar to exec recruiting when you're, as we were a couple months ago, like a 3-person startup. One of the things that helped us, I think, very fortunately helped us, is we'd been on the other side of a pretty competitive fundraising process. And I think what we did is we took the best parts of that we experienced, where it felt efficient but also authentic, like built a real connection, and we tried to have that same connection be built with the candidates to see if there's a mutual fit, like not approaching it as just straight sales, but seeing if we can run an efficient process but also build authentic connection.
Yeah, that's great. I love that approach. I oftentimes find, on the investor side of the table, oftentimes you do look at teams that are really great at fundraising are oftentimes teams that are really great at running a sales process. And I would view hiring to be very similar to that as well, where it's like moving beyond the product and engineering, your ability to drive a really tight process, whether it's an exec hire, your first large customer. There's a lot of similarities to the fundraising process. I think that actually that kind of brings me to my next point as well. I'd love to shift gears a little bit and talk about both demo day, your fundraising process with the last batch. You were able to manage a really intense fundraise, tight process. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then I'd love to talk through even just life after demo day and how your role as a CEO has evolved since then.
Yeah, I think that we've all been in startups in the past, and we've on the founding team, and we have some experience, but I wouldn't necessarily say we're great at fundraising. I think we hit resonance with our product and spent a lot of time and energy and pretty much all our time during YC working on the product. I think that YC's advice and our partners' advice to really focus on the user and focus on the problem, focus on the company until near the end was very helpful for focus. We had to learn very quickly when we flipped into fundraising mode. And I've given this advice to a lot of founders as well, like just trust that you'll rise to the occasion. So that's sort of what the fundraising experience was like for us.
That's awesome. I know one of the interesting things, and I feel like this is a new an emerging way of thinking about things as well, is you did have an operator advisory board. Can you talk through like how you've worked with both angels on the cap table, other CEOs? I think you've done a really great job of really building deep relationships with folks across the ecosystem. And what would be some best practices for founders who are thinking about engaging with operator angels or thinking about really strengthening those relationships with other CEOs? Just because I know it's one of those things where you kind of have to get into a good rhythm and cadence where it's like there are set expectations on one side and you feel like you're both learning from each other. And I think you've done that incredibly well.
Yeah, I think that the way I approach it personally is the same way I approach who I want to work with, from like as co-founders or as employees. And it's, do you have a high bandwidth connection, a high bandwidth relationship where there's trust, where there's respect, and do you just like the way the person thinks? Like, do you feel like you're coming up with new ideas when you're thinking with that person? So I think that's always the same. And I wouldn't recommend compromising that as you're looking to work with different people. On top of that, we tried to look for people who had expertise that we didn't have. So we were looking for our blind spots. Like there were people who we thought, so by contrast, there were some people we talked with who we felt they had a really great product or design sense, but it wasn't as critical for us, and it could lead to, because for us, we're a product team. We're fundamentally a consumer product team. And we were, we didn't prioritize people who were really focused on product because it's sort of like too many cooks in the kitchen. But what we did find really helpful, and what we've continued to find helpful, are people like yourself who specialize in the go-to market and have a visibility on the later stages of the enterprise sales motion that we don't have visibility on, and we know we'll need to ramp up on. And I think that's where we found just a ton of value in those relationships.
Yeah, that's great. One interesting thing, I mean, with a lot of the changes that are happening in the ecosystem as we speak, and with things like coronavirus, there's been a lot of questions where, I think right now we're in an environment where I think from my side of the table, investors are still taking a bunch of demo day meetings. If not, I mean, TechCrunch had asked me, and my point of view was that I think that YC took the right precautions. I also think that investors aren't slowing down. I think if anything, we're more efficient because we're doing back-to-back calls on Zoom or spending time with portfolio companies in tandem.
Yeah.
And so I think in a lot of ways, we're removing the commute and removing some of the, some of those in-between times to make our day much more efficient. I'd love to get a sense for, you had raised your round before demo day. You chose to present at demo day, which was an awesome presentation, by the way. Do you think that founders are missing out by not presenting on stage? And what are some suggestions that you would have for founders for ways to activate that network and to really build relationships without having the in-person event this year?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think the short answer is, I don't know. We're kind of in a new world with demo day taking a very different shape, being earlier, being asynchronous. And I don't know. I think that to some extent, raising over Zoom is not new. Like there are some of our investors that I've never met in person. I was just talking with Ryan Hoover, and he hasn't met most of his portfolio companies in person. He's been definitely ahead of the curve when it comes to remote work. And you can still build the same kind of trust and relationship and like high bandwidth communication as in person. So I think we're going to see a shift towards that, and the ecosystem isn't unfamiliar with that motive.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's been interesting to see. I mean, there are new applications. Like I've seen companies like Run the World that are productizing and bringing a lot of offline events online. I do imagine a world where it's like, can you have authentic relationships and really get to know people virtually? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Can you speak to, I mean, there's a few very specific social features in Tandem that I think are worth spending a little bit of time on, just because I think that in a lot of ways, there are a lot of questions around remote work being impersonal or remote work being, more of an isolating activity. If anything, I take a more optimistic view. I actually think in a lot of ways, remote work allows people to really connect with their local neighborhoods. And I've heard this a lot from individuals, especially for, engineers and designers and folks that want to do really focused work throughout the day. If anything, it gives you a nice opportunity to build a relationship with the, cafe down the street and the person that makes your coffee every morning, or it just really gives you a chance to kind of reconnect locally, which I think is really awesome. I'd love to spend some time on some of the social features in Tandem, because I think they are really quite different from other remote applications. So how did you come up with some of the social features, and what are some ways that people are using them?
Yeah, so I think what you touched on resonates a lot with me, because I think our hope as we transition to a world where people are more remote is that it doesn't become asynchronous. I think that By contrast, the companies that went remote 3 to 5 years ago have had to develop an asynchronous culture. And you lose a lot of human connection. You lose a lot of the excitement that comes when you're brainstorming on an idea spontaneously. And we want to recover that and give people those same modes as they have in person. And so what follows from that is we think a lot about this notion of presence. How do you know who's around you, in what mode they're in? Are they busy? Are they not? And then have more of a feeling that you're connected with them. And the key part of that is, you can talk with them in one click, just like you're tapping them on the shoulder. And so as we kind of drill deeper into presence, a few things that we unlocked were, one is showing what work app they're in. And the magic moment for most people is when they see maybe an engineer switching between terminal and VS Code. And you know that that person's coding, and also maybe you shouldn't bother them if you want the feature to come out on time. And it's easy to interpret, it's dynamic, you see it happening, and it gives you a sense of being around the same table. Another direction we've gone with that is a Spotify integration, where you can see what people are listening to and click to listen to the same song. This has been really helpful for us. Like I know when Bernat, my co-founder designer, is listening to Taiko, he's in real deep, Figma focus mode, and I better not bother him. Otherwise, he's not gonna be happy. So,
Awesome.
So I can almost get a sense of how people are working, and we've had a lot of great feedback on that feature.
That's awesome. And just to brag a little bit on your behalf, I actually had a call with Daniel this week, and he does not meet very many startups, and he said that he really enjoyed where this is going and sort of how we can build really great interactive online experiences. Because I think one of the things that a lot of people forget is we just spend a lot of time at work. Like, I've heard studies say we spend a third of our lives at work, or, I've just heard all these different stats, but like at the end of the day, it's worth getting to know your coworkers and to understand their music preference and like really getting to know people, because we just spend a lot of time working and building new things.
Yeah, I think what gives me a lot of optimism, and by the way, like the conversation with Daniel was one of the most. It's caused us a lot of thought afterwards. He gave us some really concrete thoughts and questions around how this grows in organizations that we're still kind of mulling over. It was a really interesting conversation. But going back to like the social aspect and just building connections with people we work with, one of the things that gives me a lot of optimism is the younger generation. They're making friends with people they've never met before, playing multiplayer games online, talking on Discord, listening to music together. And they're building those kinds of connections. And it's easy to see, but also it's supported by research, right? There's that study, being there versus, I think, seeing there versus being there, where they measured trust and how quickly it builds in person, on video chat, on voice, and on text chat. And text chat would never really reach the same level as in person, but all of the other modes, given enough time, reach the same level of interpersonal trust. So this gives me a lot of optimism. This gives us a lot of optimism that we can have the same kind of connections, dynamic working relationships that we do in person in a digital world.
Awesome. Rajiv, thanks so much. This was so much fun. Thanks for jumping on a call so quickly. I wanted to get the interview out while everyone's working from home, and I think you have just such amazing insights on where the future of work is going, and obviously some really great advice for founders who are really in the thick of YC and getting ready for demo day. So thanks so much for jumping on a call.
Thanks, Brianne.
All right, have a good day. Thank you.
You too.